My name is Nora Pike, but around here, most folks just call me Nell. I'm 66, a widow, and I've lived in this old cedar-shingled house on Harbor Street for nearly 4 decades. From my front porch, I can see the Rockport Lighthouse blinking every 20 seconds, steady as a heartbeat. Some nights that pulse feels like the only thing keeping me tethered. This morning, the gulls were louder than usual, wheeling over the docks, fighting over scraps left by the lobster boats that went out before dawn. I was at my kitchen table, the same one Hank built when we were newlyweds, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm. I never bother with cream these days, just drink it black. My doctor says I shouldn't have too much caffeine at my age, but when you live alone, sometimes the ritual matters more than the rules. The house still smells faintly of bait and brine from the little shop we used to run downstairs, Pike's Bait and Tackle. Hank loved that shop. After he passed 8 years ago, I couldn't bring myself to close it. Now, it just sits shuttered, its windows clouded with salt. Tourists still peer in and tap the glass in summer, hoping to buy lures or buckets of chum. I pretend not to notice. There was a time when mornings like this carried a kind of peace. Hank would whistle while mending nets on the porch, and I'd play scales on the upright piano we squeezed into the corner. These days, the quiet feels heavier. It presses down on my chest like damp fog, reminding me how empty the house has become. Our only son, Bryce, lives down in Boston now. He's in tech sales, always in a rush, always pitching something. His wife Tasha is some kind of realtor/influencer. I don't see them much. Maybe Thanksgiving if I'm lucky. My grandchildren, Sadie's 17, Liam's 14, they're growing up faster than I can keep track of. The last time I saw them was at Christmas, and even then, I felt more like a guest in my own family than a grandmother. Still, I try to keep hope alive in small ways. Yesterday, the phone rang just as I was oiling the piano keys. A woman's voice, bright professional, introduced herself as Emily from the Gull's Nest, the fancy new restaurant by the marina. She said she was confirming a reservation for Saturday's brunch along with a slideshow presentation booked in my name. I nearly told her she had the wrong number. I don't go out much these days, and I certainly didn't book anything. But before I could say so, she added, "Happy early birthday, Mrs. Pike. We look forward to celebrating you." My birthday, Saturday. For a moment, my heart stuttered like a record skipping. Maybe Bryce finally remembered. Maybe he and the kids had planned something after all. I pictured Sadie fiddling with the projector, Liam sneaking extra bacon from the buffet, Bryce raising a glass. The thought brought a small, foolish smile to my face. After I hung up, I wandered into the bedroom closet. Most of my clothes are just practical flannel shirts, old teaching cardigans. But pushed to the back, still wrapped in a dry cleaner's bag, hangs the sea blue sweater Hank bought me on our 30th anniversary. "Matches your eyes," he'd said back then, and even now in the mirror, the eyes staring back are the one part of me that haven't aged a day. I slipped the sweater over my shoulders, smoothing the fabric, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to anticipation. I even dug out the small music box Hank brought home from a yard sale long ago, the one carved like a seashell. When you wind it, it plays Blue Moon slightly off-key, but sweet all the same. I thought maybe I could give it to Sadie. She's always loved little keepsakes, even if she pretends to be too grown up now. I set the box on the piano, ran my fingers across the keys, and let the first notes of Blue Moon mingle with its tinny melody. The sound filled the empty house for a moment, soft and haunting. I closed my eyes and let myself believe just for that moment that Saturday might not be like all the other lonely days that came before. But in the back of my mind, a thought lingered, as constant and unsettling as the gulls outside. My birthday was only 3 days away. And I couldn't help but wonder, would this celebration truly be about me? Or was something else waiting beneath the surface? Saturday arrived bright and cold, the kind of March morning when the wind off Penobscot Bay cuts straight through your coat. I woke early, nerves buzzing, and made myself a simple breakfast toast and black coffee I barely touched. By 10 o'clock, I had slipped on the sea blue sweater and polished Hank's old watch. I wanted to look like someone worth remembering. The gull's nest sat right on the marina, its big glass windows gleaming against the tide. Inside, the clink of silverware and the low hum of conversation wrapped around me as I stepped in. For a moment, I felt almost special. A hostess in a crisp black blazer led me past tables of couples and families until I spotted them. Bryce stood first, all businesslike in his pressed shirt. He gave me a quick half hug, barely brushing my shoulder. "Mom?" he said already, glancing back at his phone. Tasha followed pearl earrings hair perfectly smoothed, holding her phone at just the right angle for a selfie. "Smile, Nell," she chirped before I'd even sat down. Sadie muttered hello, eyes glued to her screen, and Liam gave me the briefest grin before stuffing a roll into his mouth. Still, my chest warmed just seeing them all together. I slid into the booth, clutching the little seashell music box I'd brought for Sadie. I was ready to hand it over after brunch when the moment felt right. Then the lights dimmed. A projector flicked on at the front of the room. "Surprise for Mom," Bryce announced, raising his glass of orange juice. The first image appeared on the screen, me bent over on the dock last summer, clutching my back after dropping a bait bucket. Someone had snapped it without me knowing. A few chuckles rippled across the room. The next slide, a cartoon of an old woman surrounded by pill bottles. Then a meme, bold white letters, Boomer Starter Pack. Laughter grew louder. Tasha whispered into her phone, no doubt streaming every second. I froze. My cheeks burned. This wasn't a celebration, it was a roast. Slide after slide mocked me, my outdated flip phone, my retirement chic wardrobe, even a snapshot of my grocery list scrawled on the back of a church bulletin. Then came the one that stole my breath. A doctored Zillow-style image of my house, captioned, "Price-reduced cozy harbor shack owner ready to move into Oak Crest assisted living." The room erupted. Diners at nearby tables leaned over to laugh. My own grandson ducked his head in embarrassment, while my granddaughter rolled her eyes as though distancing herself from me. Bryce slipped a manila envelope across the table. "Since we're on the subject, Mom, it's time to talk about some paperwork. This is a power of attorney form. Just to make things smoother for everyone you know. Bills, property, medical stuff. Totally standard." His tone was slick rehearsed, like he was closing a deal. Tasha angled her phone closer. "It's trending, Nell. People love family humor." I pressed my hands together under the table nails, biting into my palms. My heart hammered so loudly, I could barely hear the chatter. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to shatter the projector. Instead, I drew a slow breath and reached for the seashell music box. "I brought you something, Sadie," I said softly, placing it on the table. She blinked, surprised. For a flicker of a second, her fingers reached, but Tasha pulled her daughter's wrist back gently, never breaking eye contact with me. "Maybe later," she said, smiling too sweetly. The rejection stung more than the slideshow. I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the blueberry pie I had ordered as a treat. The slice sat untouched, whipped cream melting into a little pool. My throat ached with words unsaid. Finally, I pushed back from the booth. The chair scraped louder than I intended, drawing a few glances. "Family isn't supposed to feel like this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The projector kept whirring. Bryce frowned, confused by my restraint. Tasha looked smug, certain she'd scored the perfect reel for her followers. Sadie turned away, ashamed. Liam fidgeted, his face red. I straightened my shoulders, smoothing Hank's watch on my wrist. "Enjoy your brunch?" I added. Then I walked out the bell above the restaurant door, jingling cheerlessly behind me. Outside, the bay wind hit my face like a slap. The sunlight glared off the water, blinding sharp. I stood for a moment on the boardwalk, clutching my sweater tight, fighting the wave of humiliation that threatened to buckle my knees. I had spent my whole life giving teaching music raising a son, supporting a family business. And now, I was a punchline, a live stream backdrop, a signature on a line they couldn't wait to collect. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not where anyone could see. Instead, I turned and walked steadily toward home, each step echoing against the planks of the pier. When I reached my front door, I set the seashell music box gently on the piano. I wound it once. Its tinny version of Blue Moon filled the room off-key, fragile but steady. The sound wrapped around me like Hank's old jacket on a stormy night. That was when the truth settled cold and heavy. They didn't see me as family anymore. Not a mother, not a grandmother. Just a burden to laugh at, an obstacle to sign away. And somewhere beneath the shame, beneath the hurt, a different feeling stirred. Something hard, something resolute. If they thought I was empty inside, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind off the bay rattled the shutters, and the sound seemed to mock me like the laughter still echoing from that restaurant. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams Hank had once sanded smooth, each knot in the wood, like a knot in my stomach. I thought of the slideshow, the way Bryce slid that envelope across the table, how Tasha angled her phone for the perfect shot. They didn't just humiliate me. They wanted to erase me, to sign me out of my own life. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. If they wanted to treat me like I was powerless, it was time to remind them they didn't know me at all. I went to the spare room I hadn't touched since Hank passed. Boxes of old records, fishing gear, stacks of ledgers from the shop. I pulled one drawer open, and there it was, a leather folder Hank had kept the edges worn smooth from his hands. Inside were papers he'd once shown me, but I hadn't truly absorbed back then. An outline of a living trust note scribbled in his handwriting, the name of an attorney he trusted with the estate. I sat on the floor, cross-legged like a student, again tracing his pen strokes. Protect what matters. Keep it in the family or in safe hands. That was Hank, always 2 steps ahead. But family didn't mean what it used to. By mid-morning, I had the number of Kate Sullivan, a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Kate had lost her husband around the same time I lost Hank, and she'd gone on to work for the Harbor Commission as a secretary and part-time notary. I dialed her, my fingers trembling slightly. "Nell Pike," she said after I introduced myself, her voice warm, touched with surprise. "I wondered when you'd finally call." We met that afternoon at her small office above the bait shack. The place smelled of salt and paper, the floorboards uneven from decades of boots and storms. Kate wore her reading glasses on a chain, her gray hair pinned up her manner, brisk but kind. I told her everything, the brunch, the slideshow, the envelope. I expected her to laugh at me, to tell me I was overreacting, but she didn't. She just listened, her eyes narrowing, her hands folded. "They want power of attorney," she said finally. "That's not about convenience, Nell. That's about control." My throat tightened. I don't want to be a burden, but I also don't want to be erased. Kate leaned forward. "Then don't let them. We'll set up a living trust. We'll make it airtight. They won't get a dime without your say-so." It was the first time in days I felt my shoulders loosen. Together, we began drafting the paperwork. My house, my shoreline lot, even the shuttered shop downstairs, they would all be folded into the trust. Not to Bryce, not to Tasha, but to something that mattered. "What do you care about most?" Nell Kate asked. "If not them, then what?" I thought of the upright piano in my living room, its ivory keys yellowed, but still rich with sound. I thought of the kids in town, most of them never touched. An instrument never had a place to gather outside the docks and the diner. Hank always said the harbor needed more for its youth than just bait buckets and beer. "I want to start a program," I said, slowly surprising myself. "Music and sailing. A place where kids can learn where they feel they belong. Kate smiled. Then that's where we'll anchor the trust. That evening, back home, I found myself winding the seashell music box again. Blue Moon played off-key, but steady. I imagined a room full of kids learning to play along their voices, rising laughter bouncing off the walls. Something alive, something lasting. But I knew I couldn't just rely on paperwork. Bryce and Tasha weren't going to give up so easily. They'd try to manipulate to corner me again. The very next day, as if on cue, the phone rang. Bryce's voice filled the line, polished and upbeat. "Hey, Mom, I just wanted to circle back on that form. If we can get your signature by Friday, we'll save a bundle on taxes this year. It's really just a technicality." I let him talk his words, sliding like oil. And then, with Kate's advice in mind, I quietly pressed the record button on my landline. "Bryce," I interrupted. "You're asking me to hand over control of my life." He chuckled, nervous. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. It's just business. You'll thank me later." When I hung up, I stared at the recorder, the tape still spinning. Evidence. Proof. My hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear. Later that week, as I struggled with the storm door that always stuck, a tall figure appeared by the gate. Elias Ward, 70 sunburned skin hands calloused from decades of boat building. He lived 2 streets over a widower himself. He'd seen me wrestling with the door and offered help. He propped a ladder, hammered the hinges back into place, and wiped his brow. "Still fighting the sea air, huh?" he said with a half-smile. I laughed, the sound surprising me. Seems like it. For a moment, we stood in the late afternoon light gulls circling overhead. Then Elias said quietly, "I heard what happened at the gull's nest. Word travels fast in this town." I stiffened, embarrassed. But he didn't pity me. He just nodded. "They think you'll fold. Don't. You don't need to raise your voice to win." Something in his steady gaze reminded me of Hank. Not romantic, just the kind of strength that makes you remember you're not as alone as you think. When he left, the house felt a little less empty. That night, I stacked the trust papers, the recorded tape, and Hank's watch on the table. A small arsenal. My plan wasn't about revenge in the way Bryce and Tasha might expect. It was about reclaiming dignity, building something beyond them, proving that I was not the empty box they thought I was. For the first time in a long while, I slept deeply. The storm rattled outside, but inside, I was steady. Because the next chapter wasn't going to be written by them, it was going to be written by me. It didn't take long for Bryce and Tasha to push back. When people are hungry for control, they don't sit quietly and wait. 2 weeks after the brunch, I woke to the sound of my neighbor knocking frantically on my door. "Nell," she said, "your house is on the internet." I pulled up her phone with shaking hands. There it was, an exclusive off-market listing on Tasha's real estate page. Glossy photos of my cedar-shingled house, the shoreline lot, even the inside of the bait shop I hadn't opened in years. Captions gushed about prime development potential for short-term rentals and harborfront wine bar opportunity. The comments were already buzzing, Boston investors tagging one another, asking for private showings. And beneath it all, owner ready to transition to assisted living. Serious buyers only. My face flushed hot. It was a lie, an absolute fabrication. But to strangers scrolling online, it looked official. By noon, the phone rang with a strange number. A man introduced himself as a developer from Boston. "Heard you're ready to sell. We can wire a deposit by tomorrow. No need to stress yourself with the details, ma'am." I slammed the phone down. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely refill the kettle. That evening, the gas went out. At first, I thought it was another storm knocking the lines loose. But when I called the company, the operator said service was suspended per household request safety hazard report. My name had been used. That night, I slept under 3 blankets, breath fogging in the air of my own bedroom. My bones ached from the cold, but the humiliation cut deeper. 2 days later, it got worse. A patrol car pulled up outside. An officer knocked politely, hat in his hand. "Mrs. Pike, we had a call requesting a wellness check. Concerns about your memory, your ability to live alone." His eyes darted toward the unlit stove, the piles of paperwork on the table. I felt the humiliation rising again, hot and sharp. They were building a case that I was senile, unsafe, incompetent. A signature waiting to be harvested. The officer left after a short conversation, satisfied enough, but the message was clear. Bryce and Tasha weren't just testing me. They were trying to corner me. That night, I almost broke. I sat with the trust paperwork in front of me, pen in hand, wondering if it would be easier to sign over the power to just stop fighting. The thought terrified me. But then I looked at Hank's old watch glinting on the table, at the seashell music box, at the photo of him standing in front of the bait shop, grin, wide arms thrown open like the harbor itself belonged to him. I whispered out loud, as if he could hear, "Not yet, not like this." The next morning, I marched to Kate's office, fury carrying me faster than my knees usually allow. She read the fake listing on her desktop, her jaw tightening. "They're reckless," she muttered. "Good. That'll work against them." She helped me file a formal complaint with the real estate board. Then she guided me through something more powerful, an easement agreement with Harbor Land Trust. "If you record this," she explained, tapping the papers, "your shoreline lot can never be redeveloped. It's preserved for community use forever. Doesn't matter if someone tries to sell it, doesn't matter what your son claims. Legally, it's locked." I signed, my hand steady. Next, she pushed another folder forward. "There's a state grant for arts and youth development. We'll apply. If you get it, you'll have funding for instruments, maybe even renovations. That'll show everyone this isn't just sentiment, it's a project with teeth." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something like triumph. Back home, I sat at the piano and played a shaky chord. The phone buzzed, an email ping. Subject line, "Grant approved. $12,000 awarded to the Coastal Youth Music and Mariners Program." I laughed out loud, startling myself. It wasn't much compared to the money circling Boston developers, but it was real, tangible, mine. The victory was short-lived. That weekend, Bryce showed up at my porch. He didn't bother to hide his anger. "You're making this harder than it needs to be?" "Mom," he snapped. His polished tone was gone. He sounded cornered. "Do you know what people are saying? That you're unstable? That you're wrecking opportunities for everyone?" "Everyone," I repeated, folding my arms. "Or just you and Tasha?" His eyes narrowed. "Don't be selfish. Think of the kids. College isn't cheap. Do you want them saddled with debt while you rot in this house?" The cruelty landed sharp. But behind it, I saw something else, panic. He wasn't just greedy. He was afraid of losing control. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply said, "This house isn't empty, Bryce. You just don't see what's inside anymore." He scoffed, turned on his heel, and slammed the screen door so hard the glass rattled. When the echo faded, I sat down on the porch steps, the late afternoon sun burning gold across the water. For the first time, I wasn't trembling. They thought they could freeze me out, shut me down, humiliate me into silence. But each move they made was only pushing me closer to the truth. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival, about proving that even at 66, I was more than an obstacle in their way. And if they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. The notice came folded in half, slipped through my mail slot by a boy on a bike. "Town Hall Meeting, Harbor Redevelopment Proposal, Thursday 7:00 p.m. I almost laughed. Of course. Bryce and Tasha weren't finished, not by a long shot. They had taken their exclusive listing fantasy and inflated it into something bigger. Now they were presenting their vision for the harbor at a public forum, turning my home and shoreline lot into the crown jewel of a boutique Airbnb empire. For a moment, I considered staying home. Let them spin their story, let the town gawk. But then I pictured Hank's handwriting on those trust papers. Protect what matters. And I knew exactly where I had to be. The hall was already crowded when I arrived, the smell of coffee and damp jackets hanging in the air. Fishermen in flannel retirees with tote bags, a few sharp-suited developers from out of town. At the front, a projector and microphone were set up, flanked by the town council. And there they were. Bryce in his navy blazer, hair slicked back like he was auditioning for a commercial. Tasha beside him, pearl earrings catching the fluorescent light, live streaming with her phone propped discreetly on a stand. They looked polished, confident, predatory. When the council chair called for presentations, Bryce strode forward. Slides flashed onto the screen, slick renderings of my home transformed into Harbor House boutique, with string lights twinkling across the dock. We see this as an opportunity, he said smoothly, to bring Rockport into the future. A high-end experience that blends coastal charm with modern luxury. The audience murmured approvingly at the images, wine glasses clinking, couples smiling on the waterfront. Bryce glanced my way, once a faint smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Tasha chimed in, her voice bright, rehearsed. And of course, this project creates jobs. Our investors are committed to hiring local crews for renovation, and once it opens, Rockport will be a premier destination along the Maine coast. She let the words linger like sweet perfume. The crowd shifted, some nodding. And then the council chair said, "Mrs. Pike, you asked to speak." I rose slowly, knees creaking, every eye on me. The microphone felt cold in my hand. For a heartbeat, the room was silent except for the hum of the projector. "I'd like to tell you a different story," I began. I set a folder on the table in front of me, its papers crisp. My husband, Hank, and I built our lives on that shoreline lot. We raised a family there, ran a shop there, and when he passed, I promised him I would protect it. Bryce shifted in his seat, uneasy. "What you've just seen," I continued, nodding at the glowing slides, "is a fantasy. It is not reality. Because reality looks like this." I lifted the first document, a notarized living trust, Kate's seal gleaming red. "This trust secures my home, my lot, and my shop. They are not for sale. Not now. Not ever. They are under my control and protected by law." A ripple moved through the crowd. "And this," I added, pulling out the next paper, "is an easement agreement signed with Harbor Land Trust. Which means the shoreline cannot be developed into hotels or bars. It is preserved in perpetuity for community use." Gasps! One of the developers muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath. Tasha's smile faltered. She fumbled with her phone, adjusting the camera. I didn't stop. I pulled out the third piece, a crisp letter with the state seal. "This is a grant approval for the Coastal Youth Music and Mariners program. $12,000 to create a space for our children. Your children to learn music, to find community, to keep this harbor alive with more than just money-changing hands." The crowd erupted in applause. Fishermen clapped their calloused hands together. Retirees beamed, a few teens in the back whooped. But I wasn't finished. I took a small recorder from my purse and set it on the table. And finally, this is a recording. A call from my son urging me to sign away my rights with false promises of tax breaks, pressuring me to give up control of my life. I pressed play. Bryce's voice filled the hall, tinny but clear. "It's just business, Mom. Don't be dramatic. Sign it. You'll thank me later." The silence that followed was deafening. Every head turned to Bryce. He sat frozen, face pale, mouth half open. "This," I said quietly, "is what they call family." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the council chair cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Pike. That's compelling evidence." He looked at Bryce and Tasha, his expression hardening. "We'll need to review these filings immediately. Until then, this proposal is suspended." The developers packed their bags, muttering curses. One even glared at Bryce. "You told us this was clean," he hissed before storming out. The applause started small, then grew, neighbors rising to their feet, clapping, whistling. I stood steady, my heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with release. I turned, then not to the crowd, but to Sadie. She was seated off to the side, her phone dangling forgotten in her lap. Her eyes glistened. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old ring of keys from Pike's bait and tackle. I held them out to her. "If you want," I said softly this summer, "you can help run the music library. No cameras, no likes, just real voices, real songs." She covered her mouth, and for the first time that night, she stood and walked toward me. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she took the keys. She hugged me tight and trembling, and the hall erupted into louder applause. Liam, sitting beside her, quietly reached over and shut off the live stream. When it was over, Bryce tried to rise, sputtering. "Mom, you can't, this isn't—" But I held up a hand. "You've said enough." Tasha's face was drained of color, her phone now dark. The pearls on her ears looked gaudy under the fluorescent lights, like props from a play that had ended. As the crowd dispersed, Dorothy, my neighbor, squeezed my shoulder. "That was something, Nell. You gave them the show of their lives." But it hadn't been a show. Not for me. It had been survival. Later that night, when the hall was empty and the harbor lay quiet, I walked home with Sadie by my side. She still held the keys in her hand, like they were a lifeline. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered. I didn't know." I touched her cheek. "It's not your fault, but you can choose differently. That's all that matters." She nodded, her face set with a kind of determination that reminded me of Hank when he was young. When I finally closed my front door, I wound the seashell music box once more. Blue Moon filled the room, off-key, fragile but steady. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. Because I had shown everyone that I was not the empty box they thought I was. The fallout came faster than even I expected. By Monday morning, word had spread all along the coast. The recording from the town hall, the grant letter, even the easement agreement, they'd all been printed in the Rockport Herald. The headline read, "Widow Defends Harbor from Family's Land Grab." At first, I wanted to shrink from it. Having my private wounds in black ink for the whole town to read felt raw. But then, I saw the faces of neighbors, dockhands, librarians, the grocery clerk nodding at me with respect, not pity. For the first time in years, I walked through Main Street without lowering my eyes. Bryce, on the other hand, couldn't walk anywhere. His company in Boston placed him on indefinite leave after the tape surfaced. Clients didn't want to deal with a man accused of exploiting his own mother. He called me twice that week, both times hanging up before leaving a message. Tasha lost her biggest real estate contract within days. A local family she'd promised to represent filed a complaint with the state board, citing her false listings. Brand partnerships evaporated as quickly as the comments filled with angry emojis. Her curated online life had cracked wide open. I won't lie. A part of me felt satisfaction. But another part, the teacher, the mother, just felt tired. On Wednesday, a letter arrived from Tasha's mother, Marlene. Handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. "Please, Nell, let's sit down and talk. The children don't need more ugliness. Surely there's a way back." I read it twice, then set it aside. There are always ways back, but only if people change their direction. Bryce and Tasha weren't there yet. Instead, I drafted my own letter. Not to them, but for the town clerk and the attorney Kate recommended. It laid out clear boundaries. I would not pursue fraud charges if Bryce and Tasha issued a public apology at our church and agreed never to contest the trust. If they tried again, the evidence would be released in full. Kate called it a mercy clause. I called it survival with dignity. Meanwhile, I poured myself into the grant. The upright piano in my living room was moved downstairs into the shop, its yellowed keys gleaming after a careful polish. Elias built wooden benches from salvaged planks, each one sturdy and salt-scented. The place no longer smelled like dead bait, it smelled like beginnings. One Friday evening, Sadie came by a notebook tucked under her arm. "I want to help, Grandma," she said shyly. She had written a list of songs, and in the corner, a sketch of the shop transformed into a little music library. Her hands shook as she handed it over. "You don't have to fix what your parents broke," I told her gently. "I know," she whispered, "but I want to try." Liam followed a week later, awkward but earnest. "Mr. Ward said he'd teach me how to sand wood," he muttered, not quite meeting my eyes. "If that's okay?" It was more than okay. It was hope. The town, too, began to shift. Parents asked when the program would start. Teenagers lingered near the shop windows, curious. A fisherman dropped off a box of harmonicas he hadn't touched in years. Slowly, the harbor was filling with new music, faint now, but growing. As for me, I felt lighter. Not vengeful, not triumphant. Just clear. I had set my boundaries, defended my dignity, and built something that would last beyond my years. On a quiet Sunday morning, I pinned a new plaque to the shop's front wall. The Hank Pike Music and Mariners Program. No family names beyond his no inheritance battles, no false promises. Just a man who loved the sea and the community that still carried his memory. Standing there, I realized something punishment had already arrived for Bryce and Tasha. Not because I destroyed them, but because they destroyed themselves. And I had chosen to build instead. Spring returned to Rockport the following year, soft and deliberate, as though the town itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. The harbor thawed, gulls wheeled against a sky as blue as my old sweater, and daffodils pushed through the soil near the bait shop steps. Inside the place no longer smelled of mildew and salt. Children's laughter filled the rooms, clumsy notes on harmonicas and guitars tangled with the upright piano's steady voice. The walls, once lined with tackle boxes, now held shelves of sheet music and a bulletin board where kids pinned scribbled lyrics or drawings of boats. I sat at the piano one afternoon playing the first bars of Blue Moon when a small hand pressed down beside mine. Sadie. Her eyes shone steady, now not hidden behind a phone screen. "Play it again, Grandma," she whispered. And we did our notes, weaving together, until the shop felt whole. Liam hovered nearby, sanding a wooden bench with Elias's guidance. He looked up every so often, proud sawdust clinging to his hair. I thought, this is what legacy looks like, not property deeds, not money, but the way hands learn the way hearts stay open. One evening, after rehearsal, I found an envelope slipped under the door. My name in Bryce's handwriting. For a long time, I couldn't open it. My fingers traced the ink, hesitant. Finally, I broke the seal. "Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I've made a mess of everything, my work, my family, our name. I've started therapy trying to figure out why I hurt the very person who gave me everything. I don't expect you to let me back in, but I had to tell you. I'm sorry. For the roast, for the pressure, for making you feel small when you were the one who raised me tall. If nothing else, I hope you're happy now. Bryce." The paper trembled in my hands. It didn't erase the hurt, but it was something, a crack in the wall, a faint light seeping through. I didn't write back right away. Forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a road, and you only step on it when your heart is ready. Still, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in Hank's watchbox among things that mattered. Weeks later, Elias stopped by with his usual quiet smile. He carried a small suitcase. "Heading to Santa Fe for a woodcraft workshop," he said. "Thought you might like to join me next winter. They say the desert light makes you feel brand new." I looked around the piano, the benches, the kids' drawings. And then I looked at him. My life wasn't empty anymore. But maybe it could be larger still. "Maybe I will," I said, surprising myself. He grinned, and the thought of another chapter no longer scared me. On the first anniversary of the program, we held a recital. Parents filled the shop, standing shoulder to shoulder, clapping along to off-key guitars and brave voices. At the end, I sat at the piano with Sadie and Liam beside me. We played Blue Moon, the seashell music box resting on top of the piano, its tinny notes keeping time. As the last chord faded, the audience rose in applause. I looked out at the harbor through the open door. The lighthouse blinked steady eternal, and I thought revenge had never really been the point. The point was remembering that I wasn't powerless. That dignity doesn't vanish because someone mocks you, and love doesn't die because family betrays you. The point was building something truer, sturdier, that no one could take away. Some wounds never close perfectly, but they can heal, leaving you stronger where you once were broken. I locked up after the recital, the night air cool against my face. I walked to the bench Elias had built on the pier, Hank's bench, the plaque read. I sat listening to the tide roll in. If Bryce ever walked this pier again, if he sat beside me one day, maybe I'd listen. Maybe. For now, I carried peace, and that was enough. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't anger or even triumph. It's living a life that is fully, finally your own. At the heart of this story lies a truth many of us come to recognize. Later in life, dignity is not something others grant us. It's something we must choose to protect for ourselves. Nell's journey reminds us that family ties, while precious, do not excuse cruelty or erasure. Even when those closest to us forget our worth, we are never powerless. With steady courage and quiet resolve, she turned humiliation into strength, not by shouting or seeking revenge in anger, but by building something lasting, something that outlived bitterness. Her story teaches us that setting boundaries is not selfish, it's essential. That forgiveness may come but only when it grows from a place of strength, not weakness. And that the most profound victory often lies in creating a life that reflects our values, not in winning someone else's approval. For anyone watching who has ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or pushed aside, let Nell's story be a reminder. Your worth does not diminish with age, nor can it be stolen by others' indifference. You are allowed to reclaim your voice, to invest in what truly matters, and to leave a legacy that speaks louder than betrayal. If this story touched you, I invite you to reflect on the places in your own life where dignity can be reclaimed and where peace might be built on your terms. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your reflections. May your days ahead be steady, your nights gentle, and your heart always reminded of its quiet strength.